Hey guys, happy Sunday. The Gators beat Charlotte yesterday to get to 3-1. Final score was 22-7. A lot of people feel a lot of different ways, and we are going to talk about it all. So let's get to it. This was such a weird game to watch as a fan. On the one hand, the outcome was never in jeopardy. Florida was in control for the entire 60 minutes. The Gator defense was dominant. There was a boatload of recruits in the stands. All of those things are positives. But Florida's offense really struggled, particularly in the red zone after the first drive. They settled for count them, five field goals in this game. So, what is the takeaway from this one? I think it's that success isn't linear. We're going to take a look at the good, the bad, and the ugly from Saturday's 22-7 victory over Charlotte. Let's start with the good. Florida's defense is good and going to continue to get better. They only allowed 7 points. Since the Utah game, the Gators have not given up more than 16 points. And honestly, that is going to keep us competitive in a lot of ball games. The defense is getting better at getting into the backfield quicker, and I think they're starting to play faster overall. And that was an early criticism of mine at the beginning of this season. We talked about it with multiple guests on this channel that there probably was just another gear that the defense wasn't hitting yet. And I honestly think they're getting there. That's a sign of improvement. Florida gave up 5 plays over 20 yards, and that included 3 plays that were longer than 30 and 1 longer than 50. This is not egregious by any means, but this was Charlotte. You do not want to see this kind of thing against SEC teams moving forward. So making sure you're minimizing the explosive plays is going to be key. Florida did a better job getting in the backfield yesterday. 4 sacks, 6 tackles for a loss. This is the kind of thing we want to see. This relates directly back to the speed that we wanted to see from this defensive line, them finding that next gear. And I think that they did. Okay, but there is a criticism of the defense here. Florida lost the turnover battle again. Florida's defense is vastly improved from last season. They are keeping us in football games, but you cannot consistently win without winning the turnover battle. They won it against Tennessee. We won that game. They did not win last night. Thankfully, Florida was much overmatched and they were able to win this game regardless. But this is an area where the Gators need to get better, and they need to get better quickly. We need this defense to start stripping the ball, get some interceptions, cause some fumbles. These are things that elite defenses do, and the Gators need to step it up here. But like I said earlier in this video, it was a criticism of them at the beginning of the season that they needed to get faster, and they are. So I think that this is something that the Gators will continue to improve on. But to be competitive in SEC play, you need to win the turnover battles. All right, let's talk about the ugly, the offense. This offense is a work in progress. The Gators had no problem scoring against McNeese State. They did a darn good job against Tennessee, even when they went conservative in the second half. But the Gators were pretty terrible in the red zone against Utah and against Charlotte this season. Now, opening drive, Florida goes 95 yards, 9 plays, scores a touchdown. Looks like this offense is going to be clicking all night, right? But then it didn't. Florida only had 7 plays go over 20 yards, and only one of those plays went over 30 yards. That was 32 yards on that play too. So barely over 30 yards. This is concerning. Explosive plays are missing from this offense, whether it's scheme, whether it's personnel, whether it's the offensive line that was hodgepodge together last night. Florida has got to start making some explosive plays on offense. But listen, the positive, Graham Mertz is tough as hell. My concern, though, is why did he have to show his toughness against Charlotte? All right, we don't want to see that. If you have to show your toughness against Charlotte, what is it going to be like when LSU and Georgia are breathing down your neck? He went 20 for 23 for 259 yards, had a touchdown. He did give up a fumble off that strip sack, but again, offensive line was pretty bad last night, and there's a reason for that. We'll talk about it in a second. Burst averaged 11.3 yards per attempt. He completed 87% of his passes. Basically, he is doing exactly what the Gators are asking him to do by and large. But play calling, particularly in the red zone, has to get better. The interesting thing about Florida's play calling is that on that first drive, it was very good. It continued to get worse as the game goes on, which makes me think that Napier is either getting flustered or overwhelmed, something, I don't know, an offensive coordinator could help with. Florida could never really get the running game going last night. And there was a huge imbalance between carries between Johnson and Etienne. And listen, Johnson is a great running back, not taking anything away from him. But I personally have got to think that Etienne is even more talented. And he had far less carries on Saturday night. That's play calling. Something important to note, though, about this game entirely is that Kingsley Eguakun was missing once again. The only game that he has played in for the Gators is Tennessee. And it really does seem like the Gators have a hard time establishing the run without him. So hopefully a week of rest will have him ready to play against Kentucky because the Gators are going to need him. Also of note, Florida was missing Micah Mazuka and Leonard George because of first half suspensions from the fight that happened at the end of the Tennessee game. So this is a hodgepodge offensive line, right? They were missing 3 starters for the majority of the game. This offensive line gave up 3 sacks and 3 tackles for loss. But again, this is not the offensive line that Florida hopes to play with moving forward. But unfortunately, it does mean that this offensive line is not nearly as deep as we heard, sometimes from me, all summer long. So it's an area of concern for sure. Okay, now this category could be the good and the ugly. Special teams. I am hoping everyone involved in special teams is planning on attending a remedial math class on Monday morning because everybody needs to learn to count to 11. After going back and looking at the tape, we found 3 special teams plays where the Gators played with 10 men. Once on that 55-yard field goal attempt by Charlotte, once on a punt return where we legit had no one on the field to field the punt. And then once again on one of our own field goals. This is not acceptable. It is not okay to send 10 men out onto the field 3 different times. This is game 4 of the season. I think we've done this 3 out of 4 games. What are we doing? There was also a holding penalty on a punt return that backed Florida back to its own 5. Also, not a good penalty. But for the first time this season, we've got some special teams positives. Trey Smack was 5 for 5 on field goals, including a 54-yarder that would have been good for longer, and 1 for 1 on extra points. His kickoffs went into the end zone every single time, were not returned. And listen, this is great. This is huge. It makes me wonder what's been going on in practice prior to this because Trey Smack is definitely better than Adam Mahalik. He was consistent out there. His kicks were high, which is a problem of Mahalik's. That's how he missed them or had them blocked, is because they were so low. He is the superior kicker on game day. So I don't know if that just means that he is not a great practice player and that's what they were going off before, which is what as a coach you have to go off of, right? How a kicker or a player in general practices. But really glad the switch was made. Obviously, this is a different ball game if Trey Smack doesn't make 5 field goals yesterday. So this is a huge win for the Gators. It appears that we have a solid kicker that we can rely on. So that's a win. Also, Jeremy Crawshaw had 2 punts that averaged 42 yards. This is the Crawshaw that we've known for the last 3 seasons. He hasn't played well the first couple of games of the year, but we know he's a good punter. Looks like he found his groove a little bit last night, and that's a good thing to see. And also, Florida got a hand on a punt. That's huge as well. We know block a punt, win the game, right? That's Urban Meyer's line. That is a sign of improvement for special teams. But we have got to figure out how to count to 11. So what are the takeaways? First of all, Ricky Pearsall, that catch was one of the best of not only the season, but probably one of the best I've ever seen in the swamp. I've watched it more times than I can count, trying to figure out if there's some glue on that glove or what is going on, because not only did he catch it one-handed, truly just between a couple fingers, but then he held on through triple coverage. That was incredibly impressive. Should be everybody's number one highlight of the day. Ricky Pearsall is a dog. Florida is 3-1 heading into Kentucky when most people thought they would be 2-2. The fact that the loss is to Utah, which means that UF is 1-0 in the SEC East, makes it even better. But now they're going to need to continue to use this as a springboard. Another takeaway is that Florida has a solid kicker, and Crawshaw played like we all know he's capable of. That is huge. Special teams mistakes still plague this team and will at some point this season cost the Gators if we don't stop making the mistakes. The most upsetting part about special teams this week for me, though, was how defensive Napier got in his press conference. He made some sort of statement saying that the mistakes are happening on unique situations, which kind of makes me want to define unique for him because he's used this exact line in his press conference 3 different games this season, which would make me think it's actually not unique at all. And then he also said that they're okay with them because they're on unique situations. I am not okay with that. It should never be okay with major special teams mistakes. It shows a lack of attention to detail. He also made a comment about going for a field goal because the analytics said that. I'm not sure what analytics he was looking at, but that kind of annoyed me as well. I think you could have said something different. Hey, we weren't playing well out there, so we figured we might as well take the surest points. That's an okay thing to say. That's not throwing anybody under the bus. And then in terms of the 10 guys on the field, I think he should have said, hey guys, we made some mistakes out there on special teams. We're a young team, and a lot of these guys have never seen some of these situations before. We're going to use them as a learning opportunity and get better. But I'd like to focus on the positives. Trace Mack was solid, and Crawshaw had his best game of the season. We even got our hand on a punt. Love to see it. That says the exact same thing, but it makes fans and the media and everybody else feel a whole lot better about it. That is the kind, that's not throwing a coach under the bus. It's not throwing a player under the bus. It's a great coach speak quote instead of those happen on unique situations and we're okay with them. They get penalties in the NFL too. That's not an okay statement. I think he really needs to rethink how he's addressing, tense questions in press conferences. But as Urban Meyer likes to say, the best thing about being 3-1 is the opportunity to go 4-1. The Gators are heading to Lexington on Saturday, and they have a chance to avenge the last couple of years against Kentucky. They have an opportunity to be 2-0 in the SEC East. And however unlikely, big things are ahead for this season, Florida still controls its own destiny. So while I don't think this is an SEC championship team or a playoff team, nothing about Florida's record says that for us yet. They still control their own destiny. And if I had told you in July the Gators would be 3-1 heading into Lexington, most fans would have been pumped. I don't think we need to move the goalposts just because the Gators have improved quicker in some areas than we expected. Success and improvement was never going to be linear. This is a young team who was riding the emotional high of the Tennessee win and had a bad week in practice. Napier told us as much. It's a hodgepodge offensive line. We were missing 3 starters for most of the game. The positives are we won. There was no major injuries. We didn't give Kentucky or anyone else any useful tape. Last week, as college football fans, we decided Alabama's dynasty was over. But then this week, after their victory over Ole Miss, it's hard to find a loss on Alabama's schedule going forward. College football fans overreact. It's part of what makes this sport special and unique and insane all in one. It is important we don't get too wrapped up in the sloppy victory. A win is a win, and UF is currently ahead of schedule. This is a huge week for UF, and we are jacked for the Kentucky game. We do have things to clean up, but I'm not going to mope after a win. We won. This is a good thing. Florida is 3-1. A win is a win. I appreciate all of you guys a ton. Let's go beat Kentucky. Go Gators.